Hello and welcome. In a previous video we looked at the Volvo B58. This was Volvo's first PSV chassis in the UK, and with 1,292 built, it was fairly successful. It's fair to say this gave Volvo a taste for the UK market, but it also gave the UK bus and coach industry a taste for Volvo and their reliability and after-sales service. And you've got to remember at the time in the 1970s that Leyland's after-sales service wasn't particularly good. But even before the last B58s were rolling off the production line in 1982, the Volvo B10M story was beginning. In fact, that story began way back in 1978. However, at this point, I am going to say that this video will be about the UK registered vehicles only. Now, I suppose with a chassis being built in Sweden, you could say that they were all export buses. But the B10M was very successful in exporting to other countries, and places such as New Zealand, Australia and Singapore took large quantities. But as I said, we won't be dealing with those in this video. Like the B58, the B10M was a mid-engine chassis, and Volvo liked this layout as it didn't impede on the front entrance of the bus or coach or the rear boot area of the coach, and made the chassis and the vehicle much more stable. It was powered by the same 9.6 litre TDH100 Volvo turbo diesel engine, which was fitted horizontally as in the B58, and the vehicle could be supplied with a choice of fully automatic gearbox or a manual gearbox. There would be air suspension fitted throughout, although there was also an option for leaf springs, and the chassis was available with a range of wheelbases which was suited to a range of uses. The first 4 chassis for the UK arrived from Sweden sometime in 1979 and were initially delivered to Volvo Bus UK at Irvine in Scotland. These had the chassis numbers 000170 to 000173. Chassis 000170 was initially used as a training demonstrator in chassis form, but in April 1981 this would emerge with a 53-seat Kitano coachwork carrying the registration YFM 289W and was delivered to Kerfoot Davis of Dyserth. I do hope I pronounced that right. If I haven't, please berate me in the comments below. The next chassis, 000171, was bodied by Van Hool and arrived back at Irvine in January 1980 with the registration JSJ430W, and this was used as a demonstrator by Volvo. Chassis number 000172 was also destined to become a bodied demonstrator. This was bodied by Plaxton and arrived back again in January 1980 with the registration JSJ431W. And the fourth and final chassis in this pioneer batch of Volvo B10Ms was also initially kept in chassis form at Volvo Bus UK. However, after a month or two, it was dispatched to Blackpool to receive a 53-seat duple coachwork, and it gained the registration of JSJ426W, being delivered in April of 1981. This vehicle was later sold on to Smith's Happy Ways, who had been a good B58 customer and would go on to buy quite a few B10Ms too. The second chassis, Van Hool bodied 000171, would later pass to Trathans and then on to Irvines of Law. It's fair to say the Volvo B10M got off to a slow start, with just 7 delivered in 1980, and that included the demonstration vehicles. However, this wasn't to last, and companies such as Trathans, Cotters, Western SMT, Parks of Hamilton and many more would soon start ordering them in numbers. Now, in the early years of production, like the B58, the B10M was mainly a coach chassis. However, in March 1982, 2 different B10Ms appeared. The first one was ESU 378X, and was a Marshall-bodied double-decker bus with 86 seats. And this was for Strathclyde PTE and was given the fleet number AH1. The second one was a single-decker bus, and this was dual-bodied FGD 827X and was fitted with a 51-seat bodywork, this being for Hutchison of Overtown. Ironically though, this would later be rebodied as a double-decker in 1997 with East Lancs bodywork. Hutchison would later go on to buy a couple of rare Van Hall bus-bodied B10Ms towards the end of 1984. Now, another early customer for the double-decker version of the B10M was Derby, but I will be doing a separate video on the Volvo City Bus, as it became, or the B10MD, or the D10M as it was also known. And this introduced another gearbox option with the double-decker version, the self-changing gears semi-automatic being offered, although most of them were Voith or ZF. The Volvo B10M was proving now to be a very popular touring coach with the likes of Wallace Arnold and Shearings, but it was also being used as an express coach by companies such as National Express and Trathens. A few B10Ms received high-floor bodywork that was fitted with a lower deck rear seating compartment. In this configuration, 58, 59 or 60 seats could easily be accommodated in a standard 12-metre two-axle coach. And I remember Roberts of Wingham in Kent running, I believe, 2 of these things that were fitted with Birkhoff bodywork. And I remember they were used on school contracts, and they were always having problems with the school kids in this rear compartment because it was kind of tucked out of sight down the back of the coach. And in the end, they had to put cameras in there to keep an eye on them. In addition to that, though, I was always wondering how safe those rear compartments actually were. The rear seats were actually right up against the back of the coach, and if it had been involved in a rear-end shunt on a motorway, for example, I don't think the consequences bear thinking about, do they? And on top of that, with all the extra luggage they would have carried as well, they must have been close to the maximum weight limit for a two-axled bus, mustn't they? I'm going to hand this bit of the video over to you. What's your opinion on this lower deck rear cabin? What did you think of it? Do you think it's a good idea, or do you think it was potentially a bit of a health and safety nightmare? I hesitate using the word death trap. Anyway, Jake, concentrate, don't go off route. Now, one thing about all the chassis so far I've mentioned is that they were built in Sweden and imported into the UK. However, in 1995, a production line was opened in the UK, and the first bus off of it was to be Alexander-bodied N931 LSU for Kelvin Central. In all, there were 1,396 B10Ms built in the UK between 1995 and early 2000. The last UK assembled B10M was W285JBN, which was delivered in April 2000 and was a Van Hall coach for Shearings. The UK assembly line built a mix of coaches and buses, with coaches for companies such as Ulster Bus, Pullmanor, which was better known as Redwing or Evans Evans, Wallace Arnold, and of course Shearings. The bus version would go to customers like Delane, Greater Manchester South, Cleveland Transit, Stagecoach, and, as I mentioned previously, Kelvin. Around this time, in those heady pre-DDA days, Stagecoach had been introducing a dual-purpose coach, which was in a similar vein to the old National Bus Company Grant coaches. And this would be a vehicle that was at home on coach work, express work, and also service runs. Now, I believe most were Plaxton Premier based and were known as interurbans, and they actually allowed standing passengers. Many of these were also built in the UK assembly line. Now I'm going to jump back a little bit to March 1989 to another express operator in the UK, and that of course is National Express. They had been looking for a standard vehicle for their contractors to use on their services. And in March 1989 this finally arrived and was a Plaxton Paramount 3 bodied Volvo B10M. and was registered NXI 9001. And this would be known as the Express Liner. Now, if you'd like a separate video on these Express Liners, please comment down below, because they've got quite an interesting story. I do intend on doing a video on the Rapide coaches at some point in the future and the development of the Rapide services. So if you'd like to see a video on the National Express Liner coach and the story behind that, as I said, please comment down below. Another little quirk to appear with the Volvo B10M story was grey-green coaches. In the early mid-1980s, grey-green was basically a coaching company and had ordered lots and lots of these Volvo B10Ms with Plaxton Paramount coachwork. However, as history has shown us, things in London when it came to the bus and coach industry shifted rather quickly, and a lot of long-established London coach operators found themselves running bus services when the London bus routes were put up for tender in the 1980s. Companies such as Armchair and Grey Green, for example. Grey Green found itself with too many coaches but not enough service buses to operate these new services that it had won. So a batch of these Plaxton-bodied Volvo B10Ms was swiftly dispatched to East Lancashire to be rebodied as double-decker buses. And they were very strange beasts because they kept the original coach wheelbase but had the rear end chopped off to try and keep the overall length of the bus down for central London conditions. And it has to be said that they kind of looked a little bit like some kind of weird hot rod bus with the wheels right at the very back. I remember seeing them in London quite a lot, and occasionally I would speak to the drivers who worked with them, and they had a lot of praise for these vehicles. They said they were incredibly fast, very smooth, despite their strange looks. Grey Green also had some rebodied as single-decker buses too, which looked a little bit more normal, shall we say. But if you would like a video on these Grey Green buses, please comment down below and let me know. I suppose it's an interesting part of deregulation, and it's quite often overlooked, and people today may not realise the mad scramble there was when these bus routes came up for tender to try and get anything with wheels that was suitable to run on a decent bus route in London. Now, another famous and well-known operator of B10M service buses is of course Stagecoach, who used them in huge numbers around the country with many of its subsidiaries, and these tended to be Northern Counties bodies, or more often Alexander PS bodied. And again, in my experience of driving these in the early 2000s, they were ever so smooth, fast, reliable buses. And from a passenger perspective as well, they were very comfortable, something that modern buses tend not to be quite so much these days, with their shallow seats and hard suspension. Other operators too went for Alexander-bodied Volvo B10Ms to a similar specification to the Stagecoach ones, and they always looked slightly different when they were painted in first bus colours, say for example, or Kelvin's livery. But without a doubt, the biggest orders for this particular model came from Stagecoach. Now, there's a couple of variations of the B10M that I've not mentioned yet. One which was the B9M, which was originally introduced in Sweden as a lightweight, low-cost version of the B10M coach. However, in the UK, it was sold as a shortened B10M. Now, with the engine at the B10M situated just behind the front wheels, the design lended itself quite well to being an articulated bus, and a few operators in the UK and in Ireland took this design, including companies such as Ulster Bus and again Stagecoach. This variation was known as the B10MA, A obviously being for articulated. Now, I'm not really going to mention the Volvo B10L low floor bus, which came in about 1995, as that is really a bit of a different kettle of fish, being rear-engined and low floor. And if there's enough interest, I might do a separate video on that as well. I'm trying to keep the length of the videos down to under 20 minutes, as it makes it a little bit easier for watching on YouTube, although some of course will be a little bit longer than that. Now, as we quite often say in Classic Bus Histories, all good things have to come to an end at some point. And the story of the B10M really came to an end in January 2002, when the last new chassis was delivered as VU51 FGN, which had Plaxton 53-seat coachwork. And this vehicle was delivered to Pullums. Now, you'd like to think that a vehicle with an important history as the last B10M delivered to the UK would have found a safe home in preservation. But sadly, this wasn't the case with VU51 FGM, as she was used in a banger race a few years ago and was pretty much smashed up. Now, maybe it's because I preserve things and restore things, but I just don't really see the point of banger racing. Do you? Admittedly, I guess nobody's going to cry too much when a more modern Mondeo's smashed up or something like that, but some of these older vehicles that are lost to banger racing, especially when they do the classic events, it does seem to be a little bit scandalous, doesn't it? And I apologise if you are a banger racer and you're watching this and you're like, this bloke doesn't know what he's talking about. I love banger racing. But if you are into banger racing, just answer me one question. Were you the sort of child that smashed all their toys up? Just let me know. I'm just interested. There was 9,405 chassis built in Sweden for the UK, and when added together with the 1,396 chassis that were assembled in the UK, that gives a grand total of 10,801 buses that were built for the UK market, which I'm sure you'll agree is an absolutely staggering amount of Volvo B10Ms and just goes to show how successful and how good they actually were. The requirement for a step entrance bus was taken away with the introduction of the DDA laws, which required all buses to have flat floors and step-free entrances. The low-floor version of the B10, the B10L, took over this role, whilst the needs of the coach operators was met with the new, improved, and I use that term loosely, B12M, which had a larger engine. And I have driven a Volvo B12, and I must admit they are nice coaches, but nothing really matches the quality and the ride comfort and everything on a Volvo B10M. They really are absolutely, even now in their old golden years, they are superior coaches. I worked with a former Wallace Arnold coach driver who drove with them in the 80s and 90s, and recently he took a Volvo B10M with Plaxton Premier bodywork around Ireland as part of a tour with a preserved bus. Now, this is a preserved bus, it doesn't see use every day, it's somebody's pride and joy. And he was saying that this vehicle was absolutely spot on, didn't miss a beat. It was perfect still after all these years. And that is a very good credit for Volvo to have to their name. The B10M will always be a coach driver's favourite coach. I do hope you have enjoyed this episode of Classic Bus Histories, and I do apologise if the sound is a little bit different to what you're normally used to, but this episode was recorded in the outhouse of Southern Counties Towers for various operating reasons. Please don't forget to share your memories of the B10M down below. I always love reading your comments and I always try and reply to all of them if I can. Did you drive them? Did you work on them? Did you travel by them regularly? What's your memories? Thank you so very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to my channel and hit the little notification bell so that you get notifications when I make future releases in this and my other series here on sunny YouTube. Thanks once again for watching. Bye for now.